Of our series of informative talks and discussions on Ignatian themes. This is the first of 6 talks to be held at 7 o'clock, and I know you know the schedule. So we're very happy to have you, and we're very excited about being able to do this. It's interesting that we would start off with Father DiGiacomo. Most of us Jesuits have known Father DiGiacomo for quite a long time. He's quite an orator, he's quite a teacher. He is a fanatical baseball fan, although to your surprise, you're going to find out that he's very enamored of the Cubs. Had an affair with the Yankees, but now it's the Cubs. Jim, I am recalling going back in my memory bank because I had to teach Father Jim DiGiacomo's junior junior theology text when I was here in 1980 to 1984. And Jim, although the materials were wonderful, the conclusion I came to was that only Jim DiGiacomo could teach using this textbook. And so tonight we're looking forward to hearing you teach us and see you in person, because really the man behind the book is so much more interesting than the book itself, and certainly more interesting than this Jesuit teaching the book. And any of my former students who are out there in theology, I apologize. I'd like to introduce Mr. John Wiedenkamp, who is Director of Ignatian Mission and Identity here at Blakefield, who will introduce Father DiGiacomo a lot more formally. Thank you.
Well, good evening. Allow me to welcome you also to this first of what will be 5 presentations this year on our mission and vision as an Ignatian school in the Jesuit tradition. It's good to see all of you. It's actually good to see all of you here. They can come out. There are some of you that are it is my privilege to introduce Father to you. Father entered the society in 1943 and was ordained in 1956. And for over 55 years, very active in years of education, both at the secondary and at the college level. Father began, I believe, his regency at Gonzaga in D.C. from 1950 to 53, and then moved on to Brooklyn Prep, where he taught from 1958 to 1970, Fordham Prep from 1970 to 77, and then at Regis in New York from 1977 to 2003. During the period from 1965 through 1990, he also taught at the college level. He was an assistant professor for religious education at Fordham University. During the summer, he was on the faculties at Boston College, Loyola University of Chicago, Notre Dame, University of St. Thomas in Houston, Loyola Marymount University, Detroit University, and the University of San Francisco. I'm not sure when he breathed in the summer, but he has lectured in 43 of the 50 states in our country, and also in Australia, Canada, Germany, Micronesia, and New Zealand. He has authored or co-authored at least 16 texts and over 60 scholarly articles. He actually authored the text, Do the Right Thing, which a number of our seniors who are here tonight are currently using in their senior elective class in ethics. His latest book, and I think I have my information correct, I hope was published in 2004, Mission Possible it's called, Where We've Been and Where We're Going in High School Education. And his father's attempt to look at a span of 53 years to answer those questions. So, as Father Pesci indicated, he is an avid baseball fan, and I hope we have an opportunity sometime this evening to hear what he thinks in terms of whether Lou Piniella will finally be able to do something with the Cubs, his favorite team. It's my very distinct pleasure to welcome your loyal Father James DiGiacomo of the Society of Jesus. Nice to meet all you folks this evening. Good to be with you. Never mind the colors, we don't talk about that. Have any of you ever been to a city in Spain called Pamplona? Anybody been to Pamplona? Did you see the men running before the bulls? Yeah, I had an inside seat for that. Well, Pamplona is more famous for Jesuits because if you visit a certain spot, where the chapel used to be, it was where a young soldier, Basque soldier named Ignatius of Loyola was fighting in one of those bushfire wars. He was defending the town, and from the French side came a cannonball and hit him in the leg, and pretty much crippled him for life. But it was providential because he spent a long time at Loyola Castle, his family's castle, a long time there trying to recuperate. And he was very bored, of course, so he asked for some books. And all they had, he was not a very religious person, all they had was the life of Christ and some lives of saints. So he said, yuck. But, he was desperate. So he starts reading his life of Christ and the life of saints. And after a while, he starts thinking, I think I could do that. And so when he finally recovers, he goes through these extraordinary mystical experiences. And he's trying to figure out where God wants him to go. He thinks it's the Holy Land, he has to come back. And he says, he goes to the University of Paris, he gathers a few companions around him, and they're the beginning of the Society of Jesus. And the first thing they decide to do is, well, what we really need are people working out in the streets and the churches and the confessionals, and that's where the first Jesuits were. But then somebody in Messina, in Sicily, said, could you help us out with one of our schools? He said, well, we really don't do schools, but they found out after a while they were good at it. They found out that they were able to fill a need for education, not just religious education, but for secular education as well. And after a while, they began to develop a theory and a practice and a tradition. And we're at the end of the tradition at this point. What was different about the schools that the Jesuits founded, it was not just to make sure that they were observant Catholics, but there was a really humanistic education, language, drama, history, and that tradition grew, and after a while it became very clear, then on down to the centuries, that Jesuit education at its best, and most of it was education in high schools. What they said was that they were trying to teach not just subjects and skills, they decided to teach a whole person. The Latin expression we had was cura personalis, that when a boy came to our schools, we not only wanted to make him capable and learning, we wanted to be a good person and a good Christian. Another thing that was characteristic of the Jesuit schools, they took very seriously the life of the mind. They weren't just getting people ready, to fill jobs and places and make a living. The life of the mind was important to them. They wanted to turn out young people who were determined to care about others, to be, as the expression goes, to be men and later women for others. And a key part of this Jesuit education down the centuries has been the development of faith. It's a way of looking at the larger world, of facing and responding to questions of meaning, of self-fulfillment, and integrity. And to this day, in Jesuit schools, students and adults are expected to be open to growth, intellectually competent, loving, committed to doing justice, and religious. And in high schools, what are they doing? They're trying to teach adolescents. And at the heart of adolescence is the search for identity. Young people, from puberty right through probably early 20s, most psychologists would say, are dealing with these questions not so much explicitly, but implicitly they're asking, who am I? What kind of person am I becoming? What kind of person do I want to be? What kind of world do I want to live in? That's what high school students are doing everywhere, in turn to help them to do. Young people during their adolescence are rearranging their relationships with parents and with peers. And the parents and the peers have different agendas. Parents, what are the parents' priorities? They want their kids to succeed in school, stay out of trouble, make nice impressions on adults, avoid drugs, alcohol, and dangerous sexual adventures. What are teens' priorities? Am I normal? Do I have friends? Am I accepted? Do I fit in, or am I left out? They're like candidates for public office during these elections. They have to satisfy constituencies with very conflicting expectations. And many a high school student, if we spoke honestly, would say, you know, I want to be honest, but I have to cheat. I want to spend my parents' money wisely, but I have to keep up with the peer consumers. I want to be sexually responsible, but I'm afraid to be left behind. I want to stay out of trouble, but I don't want to be called chicken. I want to do well in school, but I don't want to be called a nerd. Now, into all these pressures, which go with the adolescent teenage years, the pressures from the dominant culture. And the dominant culture in this country, of course, is consumerism. And consumerism defines the human person in terms of material things owned and consumed. Think of these four things: possessions, pleasure, power, prestige. They're adornments of the self. They're good things to have. But for the consumer culture, they constitute the very self. In the famous ad of Cadillac, you are what you drive. And through the propaganda of advertising, young people, and for that matter, all of us, the adults too, but we're talking about adolescents now. They are told that their highest calling is to be consumers, that happiness can be bought, and that products, the things they buy with money, can fulfill and satisfy their deepest human needs. Success is equated with conspicuous consumption. And advertising is the engine that drives it all. And advertising plays on what? On the fear of not being loved, and then the hope that by buying something, I can be loved. This actually happened once at a mall. A congressman was there at the dedication of the new wall, and this is what he said. We are gathered here today not merely to dedicate a shopping mall, but to rededicate ourselves, mind and body, to the spirit of consumerism, and to seek an ever more deeply indebted relationship to the process of purchasing merchandise. And nobody laughs, so don't you laugh. This is serious stuff. Now, consumerism in the larger sense, it's not just about buying things. It's a whole world view. It's a way of perceiving and deep dealing with reality. Christianity tells us to love people and use things. Consumerism at its worst tells us to love things and use people. And consumer culture has a dominant myth. Dominant myth is the taken for granted but never explicitly stated wisdom. And it has three parts. Does this sound familiar? You should experience whatever you desire, own whatever you want, and relate intimately with whomever you wish. And in the last analysis, sex, too, is a consumer item. I'll never forget that day in Plano, Texas. I was talking to a bunch of senior high school, Catholic high school boys and girls. We've been making a TV, and it was great. We talked a bit. I was chatting about, and I said, let's talk about sex. I said, why are you and your friends in such a hurry? And I looked at him and said, well, we love each other. He said, we don't want to be left out. We don't want to be left behind. Sex is a consumer item. And this worldview that I describe, it's pervasive. It has all the forces of mass culture at its command. All we got here is 5 hours a day. And you got the kids doing dinner. The dominant culture, all the forces of mass communication. Okay, how's that? Better? Technology is curious. This has all the forces of mass culture. It's radio, it's TV, it's magazines, and all the rest of it. Okay? All right? And it's engaged in a constant battle against what the best of families, churches, and schools stand for. How are we doing this? Okay? Now, in this unequal struggle, remember, education is more than schooling, okay? Schooling goes on in school. Education goes on all day, especially in front of the tube, when you're listening to music, when you're out partying with friends, when you're watching TV. Okay? That's education. You find out what's worth going for and what's worth doing. But in this unequal struggle, what kind of school do we do? Well, we keep doing what we're already doing. Help young people identify with the positive values of American society. Honesty, responsibility, generosity, compassion, fair play, justice, and respect for the rights of others. And we support them in young men's dedication to service projects. Affirm the goodness of their kindness to others, but make it a learning experience too. Have them reflect on the sources of people's neediness. Does it come from unjust social structures and insensitive public policies? You know, we talk about somebody being street smart, and some young people, especially the ones in the city, very often are street smart. Well, we want to make kids culture smart. Make them intentionally aware of the contradictions and tensions between mass culture and school. And make it clear that we are offering here an alternative vision of life. Offer them a level of sophistication not available elsewhere. Help them recognize those elements of the dominant culture that seek to manipulate them. And speak frankly about one of the greatest obstacles to the kind of conversion and moral sensitivity that we are promoting. You know what it is? It's comfort. People who are comfortable don't want to hear criticism of the status quo. They label as do-gooders or bleeding hearts or fuzzy liberals anyone who has the temerity to suggest that this is not the best of all possible worlds. And then finally, we have to engage in a religious education that tries to promote a living faith. Can I have a glass of water, please? Is this mic working okay? Am I doing all right? It's a little tough, but I'll stay. How do you educate for a living faith? What about the religious dimension of the school? What should we be offering students? What would we consider success in religious nurture and development? What can we realistically hope to achieve? What are our limitations? Can they be overcome, and how? I like to think of the gold and the silver and the bronze standards, which I will offer you now, in religious, explicitly religious education. The gold standard for teaching Catholics, and we end up with well-informed, convinced believers who identify with the worshiping community and participate in the sacramental life of the Church. They aspire to a life influenced by Christian values. For our non-Catholic students, that they take seriously the religious dimension of life. The school's religious instruction and activities support and encourage commitment to their own religious tradition, and they show signs of growth in moral maturity and practice. What would be the silver standard of religious education? Although not convinced of or practicing in their faith, these students are religiously literate. They know what Catholics and other Christians believe and stand for and why it is important to them. They know the difference between cultural Catholicism and the real thing. You know cultural Catholicism, don't you? Remember Tony Soprano? When AJ, his son, said he wasn't going to get confirmed, Tony said, "What are you talking about? They're going to get confirmed. We're Catholic." I recently saw quoted in a survey of religious feelings of young people. A young Catholic in the Midwest said, "Even if I don't believe in God, I'll still be a Catholic." And there's a guy who went to school with me, to a Jesuit high school with me, and he told me, quote, he doesn't believe in God, but he says, "I'm a Catholic through and through." Well, if you achieve the silver standard of religious education, you know what authentic religion is, even though you may not feel ready to take active part. And these young silvers want to lead morally responsible lives. And then finally, there's the bronze standard. These young people are unresponsive to religious insights or concerns, and they have a basically secular outlook on life. But they take moral questions seriously. They care about justice, and they're learning how to form their conscience. They recognize the impoverishment of much of what passes for moral discourse in society at large. And they are building resistance to materialism and consumerism, and they aspire to something better. Now, these descriptions overlap and they blend into one another. They're not exhaustive, but they're offered as an attempt to help us form realistic expectations and assessments of our efforts at religious instruction and formation. We must always go for the gold. And when we fall short, we must acknowledge it as a failure, even if no one around here is to blame. So what have I been doing so far? I've been describing what teaching the whole person involves in authentic Jesuit education. Teaching the whole person means appealing to both the mind and the heart. Now, saying that education should appeal to the mind may seem redundant, but look at the way some of our most promising youngsters approach it. For them, school is not about exploring and questioning and enjoying learning and taking pride and satisfaction in accomplishments. It's about getting good marks, excelling in sports, padding college applications, and cheating compulsively out of desperation in order to get into the colleges that guarantee success. For them, it's not what you know, but how high up you go. This is a description of education's peculiar brand of consumerism, where the product must be purchased at any cost, including honesty, integrity, curiosity, and culture. For them, it's not about becoming a cultivated human being, but about getting what you need in order to elbow a place at the common trough of conspicuous consumption. And most disturbing of all, many of their parents buy uncritically into much of this scramble for upward mobility. And the school and administration and faculty, they have problems too. They may be tempted to measure the school's success solely by what colleges the students attend, and not by what kinds of persons they are turning out. Jesuit educational tradition from its beginning has always stressed character formation, and character cannot be measured in terms of marks, SAT scores, or dollars and cents. It goes without saying that St. Ignatius, if he were around today, would want us to do better than that. And we try. The best weapon against mindless herd behavior is the human mind. Don't just teach kids how to make websites. Teach them how to think. Encourage them to ask questions and demand explanations. At a time when critical thinking is discouraged in both church and state, employ one of the most underused words in education: why? Why can't this country provide health insurance for its citizens when so many other countries do? Why are we the last industrialized country to have capital punishment? Why can't women be priests? Why are Americans so divided on issues like abortion and assisted suicide? Why is it wrong to take people prisoner and keep them in chains without giving them a chance to answer charges or to make a case for their innocence? Most of us, including myself, came to adulthood after years of schooling and learning all kinds of skills except how to raise our hands and ask, why? How do we know that? Yo, teach. How do we know that? How many of you have ever, in a classroom, asked that question? I don't think I ever did. Maybe our kids can do better. Well, anyway, it's time to break new ground. Well, watch out. If you let them ask questions, you'd better have the answers, or at least know where to find them. We appeal to the mind and the heart. And appealing to the heart, it includes a lot, but one crucial element is introducing them to Jesus Christ. Not the wimpy Jesus who just wants to tell us that God doesn't make junk, that he likes us just the way we are and wouldn't want us to change a thing. Instead, introduce them to the Jesus of the New Testament. He is a man of uncompromising honesty who reveals people to themselves and calls for decision. He summons the sacrifice, cuts through rationalization and self-deception, and is unflinching in his condemnation of dishonesty and hypocrisy. He repeatedly describes in frightening imagery the destructive consequences of sin. If we are true to him and to the best tradition of Jesuit education, we will tell our students some things that some may not want to hear. Here's a short list. Consumerism is a shallow way of life. Religion is a community affair. The Eucharist is a non-negotiable element of Christian life. You can't write off the church and call yourself a Catholic. God not only loves them, but also makes demands. Jesus is more than a path. Some of their moral choices might be wrong. Premarital sex is not a right. Social justice is not optional. We are called to measure up to what God wants, not the other way around. We will be offering our students an alternative vision of life, one that includes genuine idealism, authentic community, and a sense of belonging to Jesus Christ, which is just what St. Ignatius had in mind. Well, the guy who fired the cannon that hit Ignatius had no idea what he was starting. It led to something great in the eyes of God and of men and women, to something in which we are trying to play a part. Thank you. Father, thank you very much. I guess we all have phrases or terms that maybe come to mind listening to the last half hour. For me, character formation. How significant? How significant? Father, again, thank you. Father, put together actually a couple of questions, reflection questions that might help focus a period of perhaps conversation. Father suggested that we might want to raise hands and say why. So perhaps we might have an opportunity to question and ask questions about what we've heard over the last half hour, 45 minutes. And I think the questions are coming around now. So perhaps we can just take a moment as they come around, and I'm sure Father will entertain any questions you might have based on what you've heard and would be of interest to you.
The person's next to you for a few minutes. All those questions, whichever one hits you, and would you like to talk about yourself? After a little while, then we'll take an observation.
Hopefully you heard, Father. He suggested that we take a few moments just to pair up, if you will, with someone, looking at the questions and thinking, reacting to what Father had to say, and just initiating a brief discussion, conversation, and then from that point we can have Father answer the questions. So let's take a few moments and do that if you would, please.
Anybody wants to start the conversation?
One of the things that I'm concerned with, as my son grows up, the school, as you say, tries to maybe provide maybe an ideal vision of morality. How is that compared in their next stage of life, where they go out and hit reality? And so they have certain expectations. They might be shocked about what they see. And instead of maybe trying to apply what they come against that society that's maybe a little harsher, they just give up or walk away from it instead of trying to.
Yeah, well, you see, we're not trying to create a ghetto here. It's not a ghetto, right? And what we're trying to do is we're trying to say make kids culture smart, and they're pretty smart. A lot of kids are a lot more culturally smart than we are in some ways. They're very tuned in. You say, look, there's a lot of crap out there, okay? And you name it, okay? So that they're not surprised by it. And I said, well, what do you do? I say, well, you can go the dog-eat-dog way and say, well, to get any way, you got to cheat. I'll cheat more than they do. I say, well, that's the challenge. What kind of person do you want to be? You say, yeah, well, you're going to work with people and live with them and so on. We don't believe in the same things you do. You got to accept that. And what you got to do is try to make a difference, be your own person, have a conscience, and live by it, and realize that it may cost you sometimes too. At that point, you have to say, well, what kind of world do I want to live in? You guys. Am I talking about the way things really are in school, or am I off base?
I was going to say particularly the issue of educational consumerism is something I really identify with and seen firsthand experience. And I guess for me it's always been hard because I feel on one hand, I want to push myself to develop my talents and abilities to the best of their maximum potential. But on the other hand, I do want to grow as a person. And sometimes it's very easy to get caught up in that other world where you're always pushing and pushing. Sometimes you forget, to look back and take a break. And I think that's one thing that's always been a conflict for me.
Yeah, to me, I don't see a conflict, honestly, between achieving the most and making the most of your capabilities and talents and being a good person. I think they go together. The question, what I was talking about was, we know, for example, that the volume of cheating in schools across the country is enormous. Temptation is terrific. And at that point you say, well, yeah, if I want to get higher scores and better marks, cheating is the way to do it. But that's not going to make me a cultivated human being. That's really not going to develop my talents. It's just going to get me the next step on the ladder. So yeah, you make the most, you push yourself, sure. Make the most of your talents, but understand that you can't measure your success purely in terms of what college you get into, or what courses you take, or later on, how much money you make.
Jim, I have a question. I'm wondering how we as administrators and faculty especially deal with, I think, the difference between the gold standard and the silver standard, to use your image, where oftentimes our experience is that the students understand and are trying to appropriate the gold standard, in fact, far more than the parents and the environment in which they live for most of their day in and day out. So that, for example, if there's a discipline issue and a penalty assigned to a specific disciplinary issue, the boys get it, and they understand, I did wrong, there's a price to pay, and I will try to do better. Whereas the parent's immediate reaction is, well, certainly my son did wrong, but he shouldn't be punished because he's apologized. And it's always trying to water down, I think, the gold standard and say, well, we can settle for something else. It's kind of cafeteria, it's kind of a cafeteria Catholic approach to education.
Oh yeah, sure. The parents are caught up in it. And I mean, parents want their children to be successful. And once again, what is success? Sure, they wanted to get the high marks, get to go to college, they wanted to keep out of trouble. And sometimes I think the children have to kind of, let the parents know that they don't just want to be defended. That there's a kind of integrity that we're asking people to be part of. And we think that our school can help a person strive for that integrity. Very often the parents, they're not here, they don't go through all the things that we do. They don't have the same experiences. All they can see is what we call the bottom line. And yeah, parents very often are enablers, and very often parents really get in the way of the project. Well, that's life, And as you say, I think the students understand better, and you shouldn't be surprised. And that's why one of the things I was hoping tonight when I came here was that I would be talking to parents too, and that we would all examine our consciences. Parents, students, and teachers and faculty too. And we keep in mind what success really means and not take a very narrow, defensive view of it.
If the goal is to get to heaven, and you teach your son that he's responsible, that he has to answer to his maker, I don't understand why we would be always cheating him on his goal. And it's also that he's developing these talents. I don't see what the problem would be if he went to, not necessarily MIT or Yale, but if he went to a lower tier school, as long as he's using his talents. So,
Would that everybody thought the way you do. But that's
Mr. Levering has mentioned that to me, but isn't that what the goal is? I mean,
the goal is to be a good person, and look, there's nothing wrong with being rich, okay? Remember what the man said, I'm rich and I'm poor, and believe me, rich is better, okay? There's nothing wrong with being prosperous and successful, prestige and possessions, and they're all good things. But when you let them define you, when you say that those are not just adornments of the self, but they are the very self and they exhaust you and your meaning, then you have surrendered to a culture that is ultimately not only culturally but also religiously debilitating. That's what I talk about being culture smart. I think our students, by the time they leave the school, there should be very clear in their mind that that they've been hearing from other places, maybe from their parents, but much more likely they've been hearing from TV, from music, from a lot of people, what success and being a successful person is. And they got to make it clear that at Loyola, what they got was an alternative vision of life. And only you can choose, you can decide which one you're going to embrace. Was there anything I said this evening that maybe kind of struck a wrong note? Or maybe you had you wondering, I don't know, it's not that simple, or hey, come on, you don't mean that, or yeah, but what about? Anything like that. I took a lot of strong stands. I made a lot of sweeping statements tonight. They came out for a lot of things. Sometimes people say, yeah, well, I don't like that one thing you said, I don't want to say anything. Anybody got any questions or, yeah, how about what?
so far.
Yeah.
So why can't women be ordained priests?
What? We're getting somewhere. Why can't women be ordained priests? Damn define that. Oh, well, the reason they can't is because they won't let them. But why shouldn't they be? I personally, this is a personal point, I have never heard convincing argument why they shouldn't be priests. Okay? I personally have never heard a convincing argument. Story. I say mass at a parish down on Wall Street, and I give these two-liners, one-liner homilies because people are on their lunch hour. And Jesus said, pray that the Lord send, you need workers in the harvest. Pray the Lord send workers in the harvest. And I said, my little homily, I said, well, why do we have so few priests? Either maybe, God is calling people and not answering, or maybe there are people that want to be, and God wants them, but we won't let them. Well, should women be priests? Only God knows for sure. So I said, let's hope we listen to the Spirit. And a woman came, 2 weeks later, she came in the sacristy, and she was shocked. She said, it's been decided. It's been decided. We know that women can't be priests because the Pope said so. I said, yeah, but he offered I've offered different reasons and arguments. I personally never found them convincing. Now, maybe that's because I'm not all as smart as I think. But the only thing was that I said, you know, I have respect for church authority and I live by it, okay? But I got this problem. I have these little gray cells. And even after authority is spoken, these little gray cells keep working up here and saying, yeah, but why? And what this woman speaking for zillions of Catholics said, you are not supposed to wonder. It's been decided and we're sure. Well, maybe that's the way it works. Yeah, but did you know about 130 years ago, Pope Pius IX said about freedom of the press, freedom of religion. He said, that's crazy. That's madness. People say, well, whatever comes from the Pope comes from Christ. Did that come from Christ? Was Christ against freedom of the press, universal suffrage? No. Sorry, you got me going here. No. There are many people just as smart as I am, which are just as convinced of that women should not be priests. Well, I say, let's talk about it. What we need, the problem is, in our church, some things you just can't argue about. Do you know any other big international institutions where that is also happening? Where some things can't be questioned?
North Korea, United States.
Yes, United States, same way. It's a battle. It's a battle. And I would hope we would turn out students whose little gray cells don't get paralyzed. Yeah.
Why can't priests marry?
Well, I can't priest marry. That's just a rule. That can be changed. No, that can be changed tomorrow. No, all the popes agree on that. That's just a rule. They decide that it's a good idea that they don't marry, and they could change the rule tomorrow. No one denies that. They just think that for pragmatic reasons, it's better that just married men be priests. Remember, we do have married priests in our church. We have men who've come over from the Episcopalian priesthood. They have families, and so that's not a problem. That's a question of judgment. You think we ought to have some married priests, and we have intelligent discussions about that. But the women thing, we run into a dogmatism that paralyzes thought and comes from a mentality which I, in my subversive way, have been attacking all evening. Oh, have we done enough damage for tonight?
I'd like to draw on your expertise as a teacher for so many years, having heard you many times in New York. Starting out by maybe dating myself and saying, from my experience in learning the faith when I was in school, it was memorizing things and sort of from above, and God was saying this and you sort of did it, and pretty much today it seems that experience is the beginning, and I know you deal well with that. How do you deal with some of these questions in your class, and what do you try to do with the students you teach? I think I've heard you say great things about that. It might help as a bridge between counterculture.
Well, there are different ways of doing it. I believe in process teaching. The content is important, but process teaching tries to create a situation where thought, discussion, dialogue ensue. So sometimes, for example, I just we could just ask the students, what do you think of this? Whatever you want to talk about, what do you think of this? And usually, you get kids take different sides of the question. And then write out your reasons. So this, for years, I would take the things that students wrote, 2 or 3 sentences there, whatever it was about race relations or about church or whatever it may be, and I would take their statements and run them off on a sheet with 2 columns. remember, I had the racists on one side and the other people on the other side. Today, I guess you could have the blue states on one side and the red states on the other. I mean, you're picking, there were so many. Well, I like to start with, well, okay, give me a number, and then call on one fellow and say, which one of those statements do you agree with most? Well, I like number 2 in column A, okay? And some guy in the back says, yeah, oh yeah? And we have a conversation, and we get somewhere, and we challenge one another, respectfully, okay? In other words, everything doesn't come from above, and they can find this way, they can begin to discover things. First of all, discover what they think about some things, and sometimes to find out, gee, I never thought about it that way. They begin to change their mind and take a new outlook, and then education becomes interesting, and even become exciting. Well, what about this thing going on at Guantanamo, for example? I'm not teaching high school, I'm retired, but if I were in school now, I'd say, what about this business of calling people, what do they call them? Enemy combatants? What are the other expressions they use?
Detainees.
Yeah, detainees and so on. You say, well, do they have a trial? Oh no, they don't get a trial. Do they have cavalry squads? No, we don't give it to them. Well, why don't we do it? Well, we're under attack. And then, if you have, all you need is about 3 or 4 intelligent young people in the room, and you can get a conversation where they begin not just to insist on their own point of view, but I've found that students listen to one another. They do. Not always, but usually. They listen, and they're willing to have an idea challenged, and then we can say, yeah, but why? That's where that big 3-letter word comes in. Why do you say that? Yeah, but suppose this. Okay? And then, do you end up with everybody agreeing? Probably not. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Lenny, is that what you're talking about?
Can you give some other suggestions, practical suggestions about what you can do in a school to try to achieve the gold standard?
What you can do to achieve the gold standard? Well, first of all, you have to aim at religious literacy. Okay? I mean, they have to know what is taught, and we used to get that from the catechism. Now we get it all different ways, and that's not too hard to get. What does the Bible say? How do you read the Bible? Explain how, if you're a fundamentalist, you're committing intellectual suicide. We don't want to do that. Okay? But you take. I'm sorry, I'm having a senior moment. Try to give it to me again. What did you say?
Some practical suggestions for achieving the gold standard in school.
First of all, you aim for religious literacy. What does the church teach? Why? What's in the Bible? What does it say? How do the theologians explain it? Okay? But after you've done all that, then you avoid the mistake that was made in the school where I taught some years ago. School of very bright students, and the rest of the theology department worked very hard to make the students religiously literate, and they're doing a very good job. But then I had this experience. I went to Notre Dame University for a week, and I was in a think tank with a bunch of people, and they were saying at Notre Dame, they're pretty good at getting the youngsters to go to Mass and worship with us while they're here. But we have the impression that once they leave us, that's the end of it. They don't know how to relate to the adult church. So then we spent a week saying, what are the different things we can do to get our students not just to know what Catholics' beliefs are, but to be part of, and this was the expression I used. I came back to the department and said, the next step is to do everything we can to help our students be part of a believing and worshiping community. Sounds all right, doesn't it? They rejected it. They were not for believing and worshiping with. They had an academic subject, which they were teaching in an academic way, and as long as that they had academic clarity, they felt they were doing their job. I said, the trouble is, that doesn't have any soul. It doesn't have any soul. Ultimately, I know you can't get anyone to believe, you can't get anyone to practice the faith. You can't make anyone to do anything. But we have to do the best we can to let them know that beyond cultural Catholicism, we have to go for the gold standard, participation in the sacramental life of the church based on belief. Okay? And I don't know, was that school unusual in their attitude? But I said, well, you know, theology, we did courses theology, that's faith-seeking understanding. I said, we do a great job on the understanding, but what about the faith? We don't want to touch it. It's not a happy story, but it's my story. And I think people have to think about that. You go for the goal, you don't always make it, but for 4 years they're going to know that people may try to help them do it. Folks, thank you very much for coming this evening. I hope I didn't bore you. I took a lot of sweeping statements tonight. Took a lot of strong stands. And if you don't agree with all of them, that's okay. I came here to help people to think, to wonder, and to question. That's what we're here to do. And I hope that I've started as part of this series of lectures that we're going to be doing on the Jesuit way of life. I hope that I've helped you to understand, perhaps, and appreciate even a little more what we're trying to do in Jesuit schools. Folks, there's one last question I never took up. How can you have Jesuit education without Jesuits? What has been going on in the last few decades is Jesuits are getting older and fewer and deader, okay? Which means that our schools will have to be run more and more by lay people. And what Jesuits are trying very hard to do is to pass on this tradition and this inspiration to those who don't share our own complete religious way of life. Some people wonder if it really can be done. Well, I don't know, and I won't be around to find out whether we can do it or not, but I think it's worth trying, and I came here tonight hoping that you would help make it happen. Thank you very much.